Hey, thank you very much for that. God bless our nation. All right. I'll be bringing in the moderator to take over the meeting at this point, and the moderator here, Mr. Ogbonna. He is a graduate of petroleum engineering. In 2015, he joined Noto Chemical Industry as a graduate engineer trainee. He's experienced in natural gas treatment and reforming, ammonia process, and urea production, and he currently works as a control room operator. Sagona joined SPE in 2008 as a student member in the River State University, Port Harcourt. And in the 2022 board year, he served as a judge, SPE International Student Chapter Award. Saguna is passionate about the energy sector and he's happily married. So at this point, I would want to pass on the meeting to Mr. Saguna. Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. Saguna.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marcel. Ladies and gentlemen, you're all welcome to this wonderful section that we are going to have. And to continue from there, we are going to look at how the program today will run. We have already taken part of it, and we will take a safety brief. We'll also listen to the presentation. Then after then, we are going to we introduce our speaker who is going to present the topic for us today on gas well liquefaction. After then, we have questions and answer. Mayu, we will not have opportunity of using the mic to ask our questions. So if you have any questions you want to ask, please send it to the chat box. And after then, we'll do photograph, membership drive, and then a closing remark. So for now, we'll have a safety brief. Please, when you are not talking, remember to mute your mic. And if you have any question, of course, we are taking of that option out since we'll be answering the question through the chat box. And for your question, you use the letter Q, and for comments, please indicate by using C. If you are using earpiece or a headset, ensure that where you are, you can see here the alarm in case it goes off. And for us, those who are driving, ensure that you don't hold your phone by your hand. Please always stay safe and be alert and aware of your environment. To take the opening remarks, please we want to pay attention to the YP technical team lead who will take the opening remarks. Mr. Basco, you are welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks and welcome everyone. I'd like to especially welcome you to today's event. It's actually a very strategic one that is very close to my heart. Right, today we're going to be discussing a lot around gas, and as we know, Nigeria as a country really relies on energy, provision of energy, be it oil, condensate, or gas, for a lot of the inflow of funds into the country. And as we also know, the energy transition is one of the most discussed topics when it comes to the essentials of human life, for now and in the future, whether it is about energy security or about, ensuring that our ecosystem is kept green and safe, right? But then talking about how we are going to get into that future where we operate in the green and renewable energy space, we really see gas as one of the transition elements, one of the transition vehicles for us to get there for so many reasons, right? I think the primary one, like we always know, is that, of course, gas is greener. And if you bring it home to Nigeria, gas continues to do quite a lot for us when it comes to, be it job creation, be it the foreign direct investment, local content development, And I think if you begin to look at NLNG as we have it today, which is one of the key, one of the key, destination of all the gas produced in the country, and look at what it is doing to the Nigerian economy. I think since inception, if I remember correctly, NLNG itself has contributed more than $100 billion to the Nigerian economy, right? And today we're going to be having conversations around how we want to keep gas flowing. So it's always important in any space where we are to tie the discussions to the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture here is really around the economy, the Nigerian economy, the impact that we're making, even as we continue to, deliver on some of all these things that we discuss in our technical sessions, right? And today, one of them is extremely important. How do we keep our gas wells flowing even when they begin to attain late life, right? How do we ensure that we don't, get to the space where the gas wells die on us? So today the conversation is going to be rich. We have an expert in that space who is going to be, sharing her knowledge with us. I'm sure she's going to be introduced briefly, but really to encourage us to pay keen attention, pick up all you can, from such opportunities like this, where we have in attendance, experts in different fields. And for today, for the, topic we're going to be discussing, right? So I'd like to welcome us all. And I believe strongly that it's going to be an excellent engagement session. So keep an open mind and open ears, pick up all you need to pick up, ask your questions. And of course, we're going to have an interactive session at the end of the presentation, right? So with that, I'll just say, let's have an excellent, session today. I'll hand back to you, moderator.
Thank you so much, our YPA technical team lead. We are happy to hear from you. Thank you so much. YPA chairperson to record.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Barry, can you hear me?
Yes, I
Very
can hear
clearly.
you.
Okay, awesome. Good evening and welcome once again. Indeed, it's going to be an excellent session like our YP technical team lead just mentioned. I absolutely look forward to learning as much as possible from, I think it's a subject that's of interest to me too. So I'm here and with my notepad and pen, and I'm here to pick as much as possible from our subject matter experts that's going to be taking us through this section today. So, of course, we always have the privilege of having our senior members with us. And I can see at the moment we have one of our section directors who has been very supportive of the young professionals in section 103, Alhaji Mohammed Othman. Good evening, sir, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I also see our scholarship chair.
Good evening, all.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for joining. I also see our scholarship chair, Mr. Emeka Duruzo. Good evening, sir. D. Thank you for joining. We also have the assistant YP co-chair, Emanuela Agbo. Good evening, Ella. Thank you for joining. And of course, as we get more board members and senior members join us, would have an opportunity to appreciate them for their time and for coming to join us this evening. Without further ado, I will hand over to our moderator to continue with the session. Thank you all.
By dropping in our chat box, you can appreciate that there, since we cannot have opportunity of clapping her. So it's time for us to get into the business of the day, okay? And we're here to listen to a topic that is very dear to our heart, and to listen to the speaker. You will have a profile, and Akeremi, you can see that beautiful face on the screen. We are so happy to have Academy is an award-winning production technologist with nearly a decade's industry experience, unlocking value both onshore and offshore with Shape. She is also an associate subject matter expert on gas well deliquification at Shell. Academy is passionate about supporting young female engineers to achieve their potential and currently mentors female university undergraduates studying STEM subjects. Todo Academy holds a Bachelor in Engineering with first-class honors in Mechanical Engineering from Queen Mary University of London, as well as an MSc in Petroleum Engineering from the Edwards University, Edinburgh. When she is not at work, you can find her engrossed in the latest no-fiction or planning our next escape to the sun with our travel buddies. Our main energy source is our faith in God. Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that we have so much to take from Akiremi today. Please, we'll welcome her as she will present to us on this important subject matter. We are going to talk about gas well deliquification, and that is the subject she's going to discuss. What are we going to have from this subject? Well, she will be explaining why we need gas well deliquification, how can we identify liquid loading in gas well, and the different techniques commonly used in the selection criteria as she will explain. And we're also going to take some points to consider for new wells and facility design. So as what teacher said, she is getting a notepad and a pen. I encourage all of you to get your notepad and your pen. I've gotten mine as we introduce our speaker, Todo Academy. Please, let's welcome her. You have the floor. We are eager to hear from you, ma'am.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining this afternoon. I appreciate that we all joined, in the current climate with Nigeria. I'm sure most of us were watching channels before this. So thanks for taking time out to step away from channels to learn a bit about the gas well deliquification. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Hope that's okay.
That's okay, you can go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. And let me know when you can see that screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I will start. So let's get this away. Oops, 2 seconds. So like I said, so as has been said earlier, so my name is Todun Akinremi. I'm a production technologist working with Shell in the Netherlands. And today I'll be talking on gas well deliquification. And as the team has explained earlier, this is a topic that is very important for us, most especially in Nigeria, looking at the current climate that we are in, where gas has become very important in the Nigerian energy market. So trying to understand how we optimize our late life wells is very, very critical. So having said that, what's the objective of today? So as mentioned earlier, I'll kind of explain why is gas well deliquification important? How do you identify them in our gas wells? What techniques do we use? And what are things to consider? So it's so as you can see from the objective, it's a mini course, gives you the basics. So I hope by the end of this session, everyone that attends can be able to just on a high level explain what gas well deliquification is and why it is important for us as engineers or just anyone that has an interest in the energy industry. So how do I get this off? Is there a way to get this off? Anyways, in the meantime, so the idea is, before I start talking about gas well deliquification, the main thing is how do gas wells even work? What is the main principle of the gas wells? Like, why are we even talking about the gas wells? So we know that we hydrocarbons, we either have gas wells or oil wells, right? That's the basic understanding that we should all have. And when we say gas production, it is mainly controlled by pressure differential from the formation, the reservoir, and between the surface as well. And when I'm talking about the reservoir, so this is the source of the hydrocarbon. And the reason why the gas comes to surface is because we have a depletion, right? And a depletion just means that the pressure is reducing. And from the surface part, it is controlled by the tricks that we have on surface, our surface equipment, our compressors, things like that. And these hydrocarbons, be it gas or oil, they don't just come on their own. They also come from sort of liquids as well. So every gas or oil production that you see also has some sort of liquids that come with it. So which is why gas solidification is important. Because simply put, gas solidification just means any technique that you apply that would help you to improve your well potential while getting rid of any liquid that might be restricting your outflow. I remember I said that, any sort of production that we have would have liquid in there. So it's very critical to understand how can we get rid of this liquid or avoid this liquid coming in to restrict our production. So on the right-hand side here, you see a sort of a simple plot of what happens in the subsurface. This cylinders that you see represent your completion. So the well. So when you hear people say gas well, it's simply just imagine a pipe. So you see that in the first scenario here now. So in our first scenario, we have stable production. So this would be in our early life. So you just drilled your well is producing fantastic, all your gas and liquids are coming to surface, right? And what are these liquids that we talk about? So in a gas well, for example, you could have a formation water production. And this formation water is controlled by the reservoir and the production parameters. And usually formation water could have a high salinity. And usually when you have formation water, it could also have a high water gas ratio as well. So that's one type of liquid that you could have, in your normal gas well, for example. Another type of liquid you could have in a normal gas well is your condensate. So depending on the type of gas well that you have, it could be a dry gas well, which means, you have limited condensate, or high condensate well that you could have. So in this kind of well also, as your well life continues, as your pressure depletes, this gas condensate also drops off as well. So you see that is stage one. So stage one could continue for a number of years, let's say 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But then what you see is that over time, your well gets to this stage two. And stage two is where the phenomenon called liquid loading occurs. And what that simply means is that, you're no more having all your gas and liquids coming up to surface. What you're having is that your gas production has started to decline, and there's a liquid column that is building up in your wellbore area. So this is where you might hear your engineer saying, oh, my well is liquid loading, or my well is slugging. This is what is usually happening. So in a liquid loading well, you still have your gas coming up to surface, but there is also liquid coming as well, and it's not coming to surface, accumulating. I can imagine, that you have like a pipe and you have something that is holding it at the bottom. This would impact whatever is coming up at the top side. So this already is a critical part for us. If as time goes on, if nothing is done to cater to this liquid loading phenomenon that we see, then our well graduates to stage 3. So stage 3 is where you have metastable production. So in this scenario, your well now struggles a lot. So now the amount of gas that comes to surface even starts to reduce significantly. And at this point, you might not even have liquids come to surface anymore. At this stage 3, depending on the strength of your well, you might even lose the well. So you might say, you might see that some scenarios that some wells even stop producing at this stage, or they require a lot of investment to actually get them back to production. So stage 3 is one scenario where we try to avoid as production engineers, because this is not good for your well envelope. So stage 4 is when, the well is not producing at all, so there's no liquid or gas production. And this scenario is a period of rest where now the liquid is trying to go back into the reservoir and allow the pressure recovery to help to improve production. And this stage 4 is something that also helps, because after you've given that well some time to kind of let the water go back in and get your pressure recovery, you're able to get back to stage 5, where all your gas and liquids have a lot of energy to come back up the surface again. But the likelihood of stage 4 being a success depends on what you do between stage 2 and stage 3. Because you can imagine that if you leave your well for so long that a lot of water has come up the surface and you kind of kill your near wellbore properties, the likelihood of you getting your well to recover back to stage 5, has reduced significantly. So this picture here just highlights why gas well deliquification is very important. Because you see, for the life cycle of a gas well, liquids would always come. So for proper production optimization, we need to know, how do we deal with these liquids? Because it is a given that they will come. So the question is, how do we deal with them? And that is the whole point of today's session. So this is, why do we need gas well deliquification? Let me see if I move this downwards. So why do we need gas well deliquification? I kind of explained a bit, about why we need it, but I will just give a bit more level of detail. So the first reason why we need gas well deliquification is to increase our gas rate above our critical rate. So you asked me, what is critical rate? So critical rate is the rate you need, it's the minimum rate you need to have that will allow your gas and liquids to still be lifted up to surface, right? So that is what you call our critical rate. Some people call it your liquid loading rate or your minimum rate. So you need gas well deliquification because you want to ensure that your gas rate is always above that minimum rate where you're no more lifting liquids to surface again. And one way you could do that is by compression, well stimulation. So well stimulation means doing something to improve your inflow, so to improve production from the well. So this could be, let's say, an acid stimulation or a clean out, or by doing gas lift or intermittent production. So these techniques are mentioned in our types of gas well deliquification, which I would explain as we go on, but just gives an idea of why do we need gas well deliquification. So the first is to increase our gas rate above critical rate. Another reason is to reduce this critical rate, because another thing you could do is, so if there's nothing you can do to improve your production, one thing you could do is to reduce that minimum rate, to shift the minimum rate to the left, basically. And you could do that by compression. So compression just means trying to reduce your terminal pressure to as low as possible to encourage, inflow and outflow from your well. Install a velocity string or foam injection or plunger lift. So this is the technique that will allow us to reduce that critical rate that we have. Or the drastic method is try to remove the liquid downhole. So we saw from previous pictures. So one thing you could do is you can install a downhole pump, for example, or plunger. As you can imagine, plunger, just think about plunger you use at home. The idea is to kind of lift that liquid and bring it up to surface. So this is what gas well deliquification would do for us. And these things are very important because why is your critical rate very important? Because your critical rate is that minimum rate where your well on its own cannot support production. And the lower this critical rate is, the more you can get out of this well, which also means the more the reserves that you can get at, which also means the more gas, which translates to energy, which you can deliver and supply to the end market. So it's very important to get this critical rate as low as possible to ensure that we maximize our assets and get the most out of the assets. It's just about maximizing value. That's one thing about gas well deliquification, is about maximizing value, trying to scrape the barrel, if you're going to put it in that way. So now I've explained why gas well deliquification is important and what it can do for us. The next part is, what are the signs of liquid loading? At what point should I start thinking about liquid loading? I kind of showed from this picture here, but I'll just talk a bit more about it, one after the other. So one of the first signs, if you have a gas well profile, one of the first signs that I start to see that my well might be liquid loading is if you start to see that your production starts to decline. So this could be in the short term, where you see, like, let's say, for example, today we're doing 5,000 meter cubes. Tomorrow you're doing 3,000, 2,000, and you're not changing anything on surface. You just see that your well is declining. That could imply that something is happening. It does not mean it's liquid loading for sure, but just implies something is happening. I need to start looking in detail what exactly is happening. Another signal I could then put together is if your production and also your wellhead pressure starts to decline together. So remember I said in the previous slide that with compression just means a reduction in wellhead pressure. In an ideal scenario, when you reduce your wellhead pressure, basically you reduce the pressure at the top, you'd expect that, you've allowed more gas to come up, to surface. Because think about in traffic, if there's less pressure in front, cars can go freely. So you see that, you've done that to your well, or you've not even done anything to your well at all, but your well just starts to decline and the pressure also at the top starts to decline. That tells you that there is something, at the bottom that is potentially causing this decline. Then if you're lucky, you have a downhole pressure gauge, for example, and you notice that your downhole pressure starts to increase, while your production is reducing, and your surface condition remains the same, that tells you, okay, something funny is happening with my well also. Because you can also imagine in this stage 3 or even stage 2, as you build up more liquid in your well bore completion, your well bore, this pressure starts to increase. So that tells you, okay, something is building up, liquid is building up. Another scenario is, if you close in your well, like in this stage 4, and you see that the pressure buildup is slower. The reason that your pressure buildup will be slower, so pressure buildup means, your response of your pressure when you close in the well. In a normal scenario, when you close in your well, your pressure should build up, almost immediately. But if there's something that has to drain away before that pressure builds up, before your well can see your reservoir pressure, then that tells you, liquid loading has occurred. Because you can imagine a scenario 4. If I close in this well in scenario 4, all this liquid has to drain away first before my well sees the gas pressure. So that would also affect my pressure buildup also. Another scenario could be a reduction in my liquid gas ratio now. So remember we said that liquid loading, your well is not producing liquid anymore. Rather, the liquid is, accumulating downhole. So what that means is that on surface, when you go to your separators, for example, you see that you're not lifting liquids anymore. That will tell you something potentially is happening. And then also, if you're not, producing liquids, your wellhead temperature also reduces as well because liquids increase temperature. And another thing that shows you that what your well could be liquid loading is intermittent production, which you spoke about is a signature of stage 3, when your well starts to behave in cyclic. So your well will produce when the gas is there, and then when liquid comes, it dies away. Then it builds up pressure again and produces again. That shows you that liquid loading is happening. And then also you could have slugging. That's also signs of liquid loading. Slugging just means imagine the well is just coughing out liquids. It's like someone that has a lot of, how do I describe it? Someone is slugging basically, so it's not stable. It's like cough, cough, cough. That could also show you a sign of liquid loading. So these are some signs which you could use to compare with your well performance to identify, is my well struggling or not? What do I need to do? This list is not exhaustive, but the combination of one or two of them could point you towards liquid loading rather than another form of well impairment, for example. So this plot here shows you a signature of one of my wells, just to show you liquid loading in action. So for example, this blue line is your wellhead pressure. This green line here is your flow, your production. And this purple is your temperature. So what you would observe is that your tubing head pressure, so your wellhead pressure on the surface, is relatively constant, right? But then you see that all of a sudden, my well flow just starts to drop. And then I also see that my temperature starts to drop, and I haven't changed anything on surface. That just tells me something else is, is competing with my gas. Because the only reason why this happens is there's something else that is, restricting my gas, not letting it to flow. And because, that thing is not coming to surface, my temperature also drops as well. So you can imagine that this scenario is happening here because now, this liquid is coming, which is then reducing the gas that I have. So this is what liquid loading looks like in real life production data, for example. So now we've talked about, what are the signs of liquid loading. Now we'll talk about the techniques that we have. I mentioned a couple of them already in the previous slide, talking about what gas solidification can do for us, but I'll just go in detail about some of them. So we have intermittent production, we have compression, velocity string, continuous form, plunger lift, gas lift, and downhole pump. So, but before we go into those examples, the question is, when do you need gas solidification? Because you might tell me, oh, I'm working in an asset, all my wells, we just drill them. When should I start thinking about gas solidification? And what I'll say to you is that as an optimum asset is thinking about gas solidification from before they even drill the well. Because so in the early life of the well, so you just drilled the well last year, the first 1 or 2 years, you still have casing flow, tubing flow. So your well is able to lift itself from subsurface to surface, no issues. But you can start to do intermittent production. So you produce in short cycles. And the beauty of that is you conserve the energy of the well over time, and you don't just drain all the energy of the well. Because like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that causes liquid loading is drop in pressure, because your well doesn't have a lot of pressure, a lot of support to push out the liquids that it has. So that's why you start having issues with liquid loading, for example. So in early life, you can start thinking about gas solidification. Then in midlife, so let's give an example. Let's say midlife is between 5 to 10 years. You can start thinking of, okay, how can I, support my wells? So you can look at compression, you can look at velocity strings, you can look at foam injection, you can look at plunger lift. So this is something you can start looking at in your midlife. But because of how long most of these things take to implement, you need to start thinking about them in advance to ensure that by the time you need them, you have the infrastructure there to apply them, for example. And then in late life assets, you could do some more compression, you could do gas lift, you could do downhole pump. These are all examples of techniques that we could use. But the actual technique that will be applicable for you depends exactly on your asset and the type of well that you have. So you can't just say in every well, I'm going to do compression, I'm going to do gas lift. Depending on the well you have, one technique might be better suited than the other. So now talking about our first technique. So intermittent production is the easiest and the basic type of gas solidification that we have. First thing I always tell engineers to do is it costs you nothing and it could save you a lot of money. Intermittent production simply just means that you maximize the life of the well. So it requires the engineer to be proactive to understand the cycle of their well and know when to close in the well. So the same thing as we discussed earlier, the normal cycle of the well. The only difference is that you skip stage 3. So you skip that stage where the well builds up so much liquids that start to struggle. So optimum intermittent production means that you close in the well at stage 2 for a period of time, depending on the well. So it could be in some assets we do, for example, you close the well for 6 hours, 24 hours, 1 week, 2 weeks, depending on your reservoir properties as well, and how good of how the quality of your reservoir, basically, and the performance of your well, that's what will determine how long this closing period is. And then once you have this closing period, then you can maximize this plot 5, because once you close in the well, you also allow the pressure you allow the well to charge up, and then your stage 5, has a flush production, which does 2 things for you. You have high gas production, but you also help the well to lift any liquids that might have accumulated around. So you have a flush of liquid as well, which then helps you to, then you have a fresh starting point for your next cycle. So that's what intermittent production does for you. And this does not require any modification to your well at all. So So this is something that you could do tomorrow. If you see a well as the well is struggling, you then look at, okay, what cycle can I try? And you can try different cycles. Try 1 hour, bring up the well and see how it responds. If it doesn't work, do 2 hours. So this requires a lot of flexibility, but also being observant to your well signatures. But this one is a very cheap method, doesn't require any intervention or modification at all, for example. So that's intermittent production. So this is an example in application now. So the green is our production, the blue is the turbinate pressure. So you see in this first scenario, so this is when you open up the well, you see this flush I was talking about, you see this high gas production. But as the liquid starts to build up, your well your rate starts to drop. And if you don't take care, the rate drops significantly. We enter this stage 3, which I mentioned. You see how quickly, the well just drops immediately. And so in this scenario, what the operator then did was close in the well to allow, all this liquid drain away. And then what you see is that we're closing in the well for a couple of hours. Once you open it up again, you get this flush. So you get this stage 1 again. But one thing the operator then did here was, they said, okay, fine, we've done this shorting, the well should be fine. But no, that is not the right approach. The right approach is to try to cut the well at the early stage before it enters, stage 3. So that way you can reduce your shorting time and maximize this high flow period. So they had the same instance here where, yes, they had a long shorting, but the well dropped soon after. They said, okay, no, that's not the right approach. The right approach is to have small shortings and be able to maximize the flow. So you see that, the average flow here is a lot better than in this cycle and this cycle. That's just because, the operator was able to identify, when is the right time to close in the well to maximize the production. But one thing to mention on here is intermittent production is fantastic, but it's not a long-term method of optimization because there's only so much, because in this scenario, you're not really getting rid of the liquids per se. You're just trying to avoid the liquids not to build up. Or you might get to a point where the liquids just build up and you need to either close in the well for a longer period for the liquid to drain away, which then reduces your uptime. So it's about trying to maximize your production cycle to ensure that you get the most out of the well life. And usually the approach is to apply intermittent production first to buy yourself time to try other forms of deliquification techniques. So that's intermittent production. The next one that we have is compression. So compression, simply put, is reducing your surface pressures to allow you to get as much flow as possible from your wells that you have. So this is a prosper plot. This is showing you your inflow and outflow plot, basically. And so in this plot here, so this is what your outflow curve looks like for a well which is liquid loaded. So this is a well that has a lot of liquids in there. And this red line is your inflow curve. So I must admit, I'm assuming that everyone has a high level understanding of inflow and outflow curve, but just follow me. This inflow shows you how much your reservoir can give you. This lift shows you how much your well basically can pull out of the reservoir, basically. And you see that in this top part, so in this one where the well has liquid loading issues, you're almost, so this is our critical point. So this is that critical rate I mentioned about it in the first slide. This is that critical rate point. So you see that in this well, for example, my critical rate is about 100,000 and my well currently, so to know your intersection point between your inflow and outflow is your current operating point. This is how much your well is producing today. So you see that this well today is doing about 150, let's call it. And this telling me that this well is on the edge of getting to 100,000 and starts to liquid load and struggle. So the engineer is saying, you know what, to ensure that I don't get to, this point of my well performance, we need to try to reduce our turbinate pressure. And one way to do that is by installing a compressor. So what compressor, would allow you to reduce your tube net pressure, and you see the impact almost immediately. So you see that with a reduction in tube net pressure, production in this scenario is improved by about 50%, and our critical rate, our Q-min, is reduced to about 80%. So what does this mean for us? This tells us that now we're able to get more gas production from this particular case, and we're also able to produce the wall for longer because we've reduced our Q-min. So this means that the wall has longer time to produce stably, and for us to get more resources out of it because we've had compression. If you did not have compression, for example, we might have had to close in the well when it did 100,000 and maybe do intermittent production, or maybe just leave it as it is. But with compression, we give this well a new life and allow us, get more out of the well, which is what we want to do for our assets, to ensure that we maximize production, we make the most out of the resources that we have. That's what gas solidification is, simply put. So this is what compression is on a high level. And in terms of cost, so intermittent production, like I said, does not require any modification to your wells or anything. Compression is quite expensive because you need to install a compressor and do a lot of surface modifications. But you can see that compression is one scenario where the gains are almost instant, and the gains are also can be applied to different wells also. Because if you have a compressor on a platform, for example, you can connect it to as many wells as on that platform, and then you get the gains for all the wells. While with other techniques of gas solidification, you install them for that particular well, and that gain is just for that well. Compression is one that could affect multiple wells, which is installed on. So although it is very expensive, the gains are usually a lot wider compared to other techniques. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So another technique, another one which I really love, is a velocity string. So basically what this means is a velocity string, simply put, is a smaller tubing. So in our walls, we have different sizes of tubing ranging from about, let's say, 7-inch, 5-inch tubing, 3.5-inch tubing, different sizes of tubing. And when you drill a new well, usually production optimization, we want to have as big tubing as possible because we want to get as much out of the well as possible. But as time goes on, as your wells start to decline, you start to lose your energy, these big tubings are too big for the amount of gas that you have. So one way to improve our production is to install a smaller tubing into that well to reduce the area while also reducing the velocity. It's like, in a straw. So you have a cup now, so for an adult, for example, you could easily drink in your cup, but for a baby or younger child, to help them, drink from that cup, you could put in a straw, for example. Or if your drink is about to finish and you want to minimize the drink, let me use the word minimize, you put in a straw and then you start, trying to suck from different directions. That's what the velocity string does for you, basically. So it's just a smaller tubing to allow you get the most out of your wells for a longer period of time. So this is also the inflow model, which I talked about. So what you see here now is the same thing. So this blue line is your lift curve for a well with the big tubing. So let's imagine, let's say 5.5-inch tubing, while this is your lift curve for a smaller tubing now. And what you see here is that your intersection points, now remember I said your intersection points between your outflow and your inflow curves is what your well can do. So you see that while for compression, your intersection point where you installed compression was to the right, so you're able to get more out of the well. With velocity string, your intersection point is actually smaller because, like I said, you have a smaller tubing, so you've restricted the area basically. So you see that, for example, in this case now, we're going from, let's say, about so with that velocity string, we're doing about, let's say, 50,000 now, and with velocity string, we're doing about 45,000. So you see that, we've reduced the amount of gas that this well can produce. But what we are doing is that we are guaranteeing the longevity of this well, right? Because you see that our Q min, our critical rate here, you could argue that it's about 48,000 here. Or maybe you could even push it and say, okay, maybe this well could be unstable, maybe it could flow at 36. So it is still high. But with the velocity string, you can push this wall to about 10,000. So this is telling you that with a velocity string, you can pull more out of your well. So yes, your rates might be smaller initially, but you're able to produce for longer. So that is why for velocity string in particular, the timing of installing this technique is very, very important. So you don't want to install it in a well that is still doing high rates because you just restrict yourself. But rather you want to install it when you start to see that the well is struggling, and then you help the well to produce. So which is what I'm mentioning here, that although like if you reduce your well potential, the main outcome here is, you reduce your Q min, which guarantees longevity, basically. So this is just an example from operations. So your gas rate is your green, tubular pressure is blue, temperature is this. So you see that before the velocity string was installed, the well will flow and drop just like in the previous signals, which I showed you. But once we installed the smaller tubing, the well was able to maintain stable rates. So although lower than initially, but it is stable, which if you compare the average production, then you get a better value with the velocity string installed here. Looking at my time, moderator, how much time do I have left actually?
Okay, you have about 8 minutes left.
8 minutes left. Good, perfect. Thank you. So let me go quickly. So the next one is foam. So foam is also another technique which we apply to improve our production in gas wells. So what foam does, as you can imagine, what you do is you inject foam into your gas well. So this is what the setup could look like. So inject your foam into your gas well, and the foam helps you to reduce your hydrostatic and the liquid in the well, basically, and helps you to basically lift the liquids. And the different means of doing that, you could do that by capillary string injection. So basically installing a quarter-inch line into the well and inject the foam continuously to help lift liquids. Or you could have a batch foam treatment where every week or every month, you inject some foam into the well and then produce it back. The plan was to show a video, but I wouldn't show that now. But the idea was that, with the more foam you inject, the more you're able to improve your liquid lift, basically. That was the idea behind this video. And this example just also showed you as well that with the foam injection, we're then able to increase our gas rate. But one thing to note here is that it's not every time that the higher the foam injection means the higher gas rate. So if you want to go with foam in your wells, you need to do tests as well, apart from compatibility tests, but also understanding how much foam is actually required. So you see that in this case, either they did, let's say 45 liters per day of foam or 70 liters per day of foam. The rates were about the same. So now it's now up to the engineer with the production chemist to understand, what is the right amount of foam that is cost effective, but also giving us the gas rates that we are looking for example. So this is what foam does for us. And this is just an example showing that sometimes you could also have multiple techniques installed in a certain well. So you see this well, for example, we had the velocity string installed. You see that, yes, the average rates dropped as we expected, as explained previously, but we still didn't have the stability of flow. So then we installed foam, and then you then see the stability of flow rates here. So sometimes you need to combine different techniques, but this doesn't apply in every scenario because, as you can imagine, each of them have cost implications as well. So then it depends on what is the value of the price and how much are you willing to pay, for example. But this is on that. And plunger, I wouldn't talk too much, but the idea with plunger is, let me just use, the idea of plunger is, you go into the well as liquid builds up, at the bottom of the well, once it gets to a certain pressure, then this plunger brings that liquid up to surface basically, and it takes it out of the well. And then over time, that liquid builds up again and it plunges it out. So just think of a normal plunger. That is how it works basically. But one thing with this one is for it to be effective, you'd imagine you need to have free access from your subsurface to like the top part of your well. So in wells, for example, where you need to have a safety valve installed, that could be a restriction, for example. So these are a few things one needs to consider. So given I only have probably like 5 minutes left, I wouldn't talk too much about this. I'll go very quickly to how we select, which one to use. So like I mentioned, there are a number of them to use, but it depends on what type of well do I have, what conditions do I have. So you see that, so this is the compression, this is the velocity string, this is continuous form, gas lift, this is a downhole pump, and this is a plunger. So if you have a high liquid well, for example, continuous form is good for you, gas lift is good for you. In a velocity string, you might want to reconsider because, like I said, this is the smaller tubing now. So if you have a well that has a lot of liquid, so all that liquid is coming up to you at surface, you need to ensure that you can manage it on surface, before you install it. If you have issues with sands and solids, for example, that might be an issue for a plunger. Because remember, like I said, the plunger is going to your well to lift the liquids to surface. If your well produces a lot of sands and things like that, that could be an issue for the plunger, which would mean that you have to have a lot of maintenance happening. So you need to consider that for your cost scenario, for example. In terms of the completion, what that you require. So with the compression, velocity string, continuous form, the normal completion, that is fine. You can install your equipment there. But with a gas lift, so if you want to have gas lift, you need to have a side pocket mandrel, for example, to allow you inject, your gas lift into your well. If you want to install a plunger, for example, it needs to be a big tubing, and it should not have too many things in there. Because remember, like I said, the plunger has to go straight up. So there's that deviations or other things in there that could also restrict, how effective your technique works. The same thing in regards to the cost as well. So in terms of cost, like I said, compression is very expensive, but the gains, could be spread over many wells. Velocity string, continuous form, gas lift, also pretty cheap. The downhole pump could be expensive, also depending on the vendors and things like that. But in terms of reliability, velocity strings, because it's just a tubing, right? So pretty reliable. With continuous form, because you're injecting something into your well, you could have issues with the valves and things like that. But I've covered this very quickly, but the idea behind this is that whatever technique you want to use, you need to look at the condition of your well itself. Does it make sense for me? Is it the right thing to do, given the conditions of the well that I expect? On this one, the idea is just showing that there are different techniques, but we need to find the one that works best for our well, because our main goal, like I said, beginning, is to optimize a recovery. And you get optimal recovery from as the lowest bottom pressure you can get from a well, basically. So you see, for example, in this scenario now, just for this particular example, plunger and pump. So the A factor talks about your inflow. So the idea is that depending on the type of inflow you have, which kind of technique makes sense that will give you the lowest bottom pressures possible. You see that for this, compression is the best, because this takes you to your lowest bottom pressure as possible, for example. And in this scenario, you see that plunger and pump, whatever the inflow, it works for you. But then this is where conversations are happening and say, okay, plunger and pump work good, but then looking at my well condition, looking at my infrastructure, does it make sense? So there are many options, but like I say, you need to know your well and know what's actually feasible, both economically and both looking at what is actually available for you to apply. And the last thing I have is, so we've spoken very quickly about what techniques do we have, how do we identify liquid loading, things like that. But what if, you're privileged to work in a new well design or new facility design? What kind of things should we bring into the table to ensure that you don't get to 10 years down the line and we're not able to optimize our wells again. So a few things is that always consider future deliquification when you're designing your new wells. Just already start thinking about it. What kind of techniques do we need to use based on our well properties? So select a tubing size that is robust enough in low production scenarios. So usually for new wells, like I said, we want to go as big as possible to, get as much out, but sometimes that's not the best, because as big as possible maybe might only last you for 1 year, and then in 2 years your well is already struggling. If you think about that, does that make sense? So this also go back to use a monobore completion. So this just means try to keep your completion as simple as possible, to avoid unnecessary pressure losses, for example, and also to avoid risk with other well entries. Ensure that you have pressure gauges that allow us to do intermittent production, for example. Ensure you have a profile to hang your velocity string. Ensure that you have wellhead access. You can access your Christmas tree, your wellhead, to do any sort of intervention that you want to do. Ensure that you can also access your flow lines to do compression. Also plan for compression as well, because if you're going to have a compression, you need a lot of power. So plan for that in your design. And also plan for going to use gas lift, plan for gas lift flow line as well. So a lot of things to think about, but it's just about bringing it to conversation to ensure that whatever we design at the initial stage, we're not limiting ourselves. We are thinking as far ahead as possible, that gives us options to try different things to optimize our well production, basically. And the last thing. So just to summarize, gas well deliquification is any technique, I said, to limit the restrictions by, that might be caused because, you have too much liquids. And this is an issue when your gas rate has become too low that you can't, lift those liquids. And the signatures of that is you have unstable well behavior, you have slugging, your pressure buildup is slow. You start to see instability in your flow performance. That tells you something funny is happening. And what then gas well deliquification does for you is gives you an opportunity to increase your gas rate above this critical rate, or to even to reduce that critical rate, for example. And the most important thing is to have a gas well deliquification strategy. So even if you're not there when your asset was designed, and now you're in midlife or whatever, you don't know what to do, as a good production or optimization engineer, you should be looking at, what is my technique for my wells. So the best scenario is to look at your bunch of wells, look at, okay, based on their properties, based on how they behave, what techniques are applicable for them, because a lot of these techniques, they require time to deliver the equipment, for example. So you want to ensure that we made a plan that we need, let's say, a velocity string for this well in 2 years. So we start preparing for this. So it's not like when the well dies today, then we're scrambling looking for a vendor to supply us tubing, or vendor to supply us a compressor. So we want to already have the plan, so we can already know, okay, which ones does it make sense to start planning for velocity string? Which one do you want to start doing foam? Which ones do you want to start doing plunger, for example? Having a good plan allows us to avoid, scrambling at the last minute, and also allows us not to do damage to the wells. Because some of these wells, the more liquids that come in, you're also affecting your near wellbore permeability as well. So some of these wells usually do not recover. When there's too much liquid around that perforations, then your wells start to struggle with production. Even if you take out all the liquids, that near wellbore area is already damaged, for example. So that could also be an issue that you'd have. So you need to be proactive, in your well optimization all through the life of the well. And finally, not all techniques apply in all the wells. So you need to know, so candidate selection is very key. So you should know your wells, you should know what well will be best for each candidate, because if you put the wrong technique in a well, apart from, costing you economics, you could also damage the well, for example. So if you have a well, which is a good well, and then you install a velocity string, then you choke the well back. And then, maybe you might not have the resources to pull it out again. So one has to be careful about what you select. Try to understand what are the issues with the well, what future challenges can this well have, and then pick the right candidate for that particular well. yeah, this is all I had. I'd like to acknowledge my SME, Anurag. Yeah, is the main support for this as well. He wasn't able to join us here, but wanted to at least thank him when I send this to him. Yeah, I do apologize for going over time, but I wanted to just cover on a high level what gas well deliquification is and what options do we have, basically. And now I open the floor to questions on if there's any part you'd like me to speak a bit more on or to explain further on. Thank you. Am I still here?
Thank you so much, our dear presenter. We enjoy every bit of it. I think the only thing we are lacking now is that we don't have enough time to listen to you. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. No
It's a
worries.
wonderful section, and we all appreciate all that you have done for us. Thank you so much. In our midst, we have, we would like to acknowledge some or to recognize some senior members who are here with us. We have with us the person of Dan Abia, our section chairman. We also have with us a senior member, Dr. Ndubisi Okereke. We also have with us Dr. Jude, Captain J with us. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation, sir. And just entry, we also have YP Mama, the person of Dorcas Otis Kuru. She is here with us. Thank you, we really appreciate. We have some questions for you, and these are questions that will help us to remember some of the things you said. Because of time, I will not go through what you have presented already. So let's see some of the questions we have on the chat. For the questions that we have, sorry, my device just locked out. I have to switch my device. Please, Ofure, can you take some of the questions? Do you have opportunity of doing that?
Yeah.
Please,
Thanks so much,
please,
Todun, for that fantastic presentation. We have a couple of questions on the chat, and these questions are coming from Dr. Ndubisi Okereke, this first one. By the way, Dr. Ndubisi Okereke is our assistant, the membership chair for Port Harcourt section. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining. So I'll just read through. It says, great session, Todun. What do you mean by closing the well in the first case study? Does it mean shutting or complete shutdown?
Yeah, no, so thanks a lot. So indeed, so what I mean is just shutting. So you're closing the wall on the flowing valve, for example, and for a couple of hours, a couple of days, depending on this type of well it is. And basically what you're doing in that scenario is allowing the wall pressure to energize, and then you then use that pressure to push out whatever liquids that might have accumulated over the period of flowing. So just a simple closing on the flowing valve, or in some assets, you're closing on the 3 valves as well. It depends on the type of isolation strategy that you have in your asset, but it's nothing complex, just closing on the valve and let the wall recharge.
Okay, thank you. See another one from Dr. Ndubisi. It says, then drawing from an FA training I attended at TNO sometime in 2013, there's this concept of deploying some form of polymers that could moderate the rate of drop in the liquids. Is this a concept that Share explores, or do you know any other IOCs that may be exploring such concepts?
Yeah, no, so thanks for this. I personally have not heard of this, but I know that the production chemistry team is doing a lot of work in the type of foam that we use as well, trying to see if the foam, if we could have other chemicals in the foam that we inject that could help us to improve our lift performance. But I know a lot of them are still in the research phases because there are concerns about, whatever you inject in the wall, you don't want it to affect your wall permeability as well. So we need to be careful that we don't inject things that would end hindering our flow potential. So I'm not aware of, how far those things have made progress, but I know I've heard one or two things about what you mentioned, but as of now, I don't have any firm confirmation or experience of them using it and saying it's been successful. So I can't, say too much on that one, unfortunately.
Okay. So we'll move to the next. What is the main chemistry behind foam being able to improve gas production rates in your thoughts?
Okay, so it is more about that the foam helps you to lift the liquid. So it's not like the foam is going to clean up your well or do any sort of well inflow improvement. It's more that it's helping you to lighten up your liquid load, making it easy for the gas that you then have to lift that liquid. Basically, that is me as a production technologist trying to simplify what my production chemist does. I'm sure if he was here, he would kill me. But simply put, the idea is that you have a lot of liquid somewhere that you put foam to make that liquid light, because our main issue is that the gas that we have, at that particular period of time, because the reservoir pressure cannot lift that liquid anymore. So that foam just lightens that liquid basically and helps that lift performance. So that is a simple way to look at it. But I'm happy to share more resources on how foam works and the science behind foam techniques for deliquification if the person interested to contact me afterwards, because it's a whole science to be honest.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure those responses are helping our Dr. Ndubisi. So another one, why is MHWC not reliable for gas well deliquification?
So the reliability is not in sense of compressors are not good. It is more about if you've worked in operations, you know that compressors are one of the things that fail a lot of the time. I could ask my friends in operations what they did to our compressors, but for some reason, every asset I go, the compressors sometimes fail. So that is where that issue comes from, that we say, the reliability with compressors for gas solidification is low. But this is something that could be improved depending on, how the compressors and your assets are maintained. So if you have a good maintenance structure, for example, and you have a good sparing philosophy, so we have a backup compressor, for example, then we ensure that if one compressor fails, we have a backup to ensure that we can still get the gas out of it. I think the only difference is that with other types of techniques, those techniques are installed in the well, and usually if you install a velocity string, the well is good to go for the rest of its life, kind of thing. But with compression, because you're dependent on something on surface which is independent of the well itself. So that's where that reliability key or piece comes into place. So it's not that compressors are actually the best technique, because you get your pressures as low as possible and you improve your outflow. But because there's too many other things that are dependent on it, that's where that reliability comes into place. I hope that helps.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, it does. Okay, the next one from Mr. Patrick. It said, kindly throw more light on downhole pump as a technique.
Okay.
Yeah.
So downhole pump, just given on a high level. So the idea is that you have a pump that would help you, to kind of lift your liquids to surface, kind of similar to the pump that we have, borehole. So I'm sure, like, a lot of us in Nigeria, we have our pumps, boreholes in our house, to get liquids and things like that. So the idea behind that is you have the pump in there, and they could have, like, let's say, some similar to the plunger as well, the sort of carrier that as you produce, the liquid accumulates at the top of it, and then at a set pressure, which you might have set at on top side. So, okay, let's say when the pressure builds up to X amount of pressure, then that then comes up to surface, or you say after every 12 hours, let this carrier come up to surface, basically. So it kind of acts like a plunger. So that's like usually think of plunger pump as the same thing. The only difference is that in this scenario, you're installing let me call it like an equipment in your well, a machine. So it's prone to failure in that sense, right? And if you have issues with like sand or things, then you have the reliability issue with that, because you have a pump in there, and if there's sand or other things in your well, then you need to have regular maintenance with that also. So you need to consider that if you're going to install a downhole pump, you need to consider that you might need to do regular maintenance, just because a lot of things are passing through the fine details of a pump. Yes, I saw the question about ESP. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So a final one from Mr. Mike. He has a comment and also 2 questions. Hi, Todo. Nice. Hi, Todo. Nice and interesting presentation. Few comments from me. Just checking if you have had some experiences. One, when considering the foam, gas lift, or stakes, do you have a criteria to consider? Is there a liquid column height that can impact your performance? Number 2 says, does the property of the reservoir affect the performance of the foam application?
No, so that is good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that question. So usually with foam, foam gas lift or foam stick. So foam injection and foam sticks, let's put them on one bucket. Gas lift is another bucket. So if you want to have gas lift, you must have, somewhere to inject the gas, basically. So you need a side pocket mandrel. So for those of us that might not be aware, so you have your tubing picture, as I mentioned, they need to have another section, in that tubing already installed for you to inject that gas. I also need to have a gas source on surface and compression. So if I'm working in an asset where, first of all, that my completion doesn't have that side pocket mandrel for me to inject that gas, then gas lift is not an option already. Or if I do not have a gas source, gas lift is not an option. That's just from a technical perspective. Then foam, so either batch foam or continuous foam or foam sticks, you could use any one of them. It depends on, what you're looking for. So in the past, foam sticks, where let's say the initial basis of how we use foam for gas solidification. Then as time went on, then we went into continuous foam injection. And the difference between foam sticks and continuous foam is the foam stick is, you just, as you can imagine, you drop a foam stick in a well, you leave it for some time, and then you open up the well. And the idea is that the foam the stick would dissolve in the well. But that is a temporary solution, right? But with the continuous foam, you install a string in your well, and you continue injecting foam over a certain period of time. So that is more continuous. The difference between the two is cost. So as you can imagine, the permanent installation of foam, the capillary string, that will require you to bring in a vendor that has that particular equipment. You might need to modify your Christmas tree to allow you to connect that foam string and potentially change some setups as well. While for the foam stick, you just drop it in your well, and then you're off. So there's cost implications, but also in terms of reliability as well. So your continuous foam, you get your foam continuous injecting, and you can potentially have smoother production. While the foam sticks, maybe you get your effect for maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, and then until next time you put your foam in again before you get that ability of production. So there are a few things to consider, but if a well would work with foam, if you use foam stick or continuous foam, that would be an economic discussion. But if a well would work with a gas lift, then you're looking at the completion type and what you have in terms of infrastructure. There are a lot more things regards to the well properties as well, but just on a high level, where you can use the both of those two different scenarios.
Awesome.
Did I answer? Then there's another part of the question. Does the property of the reservoir affect the performance of the foam? Yes. So one thing for sure that affects is condensate. So I didn't touch much about it. So condensate is oil, right? So you can imagine when you're, and we know that we've seen from tests that condensate actually acts against foam. So like when you're washing washing or oil, now washing like soap or whatever, you know, like you need to have a lot more soap to, you know, wash oily pots and things like that. So we found that, you know, with walls that have high condensate, you need to be very, there's been a lot more chemistry in the type of foam that you use. So your condensate ratio is very critical when you're choosing your foam treatment, and also the amount of water that you have as well, because you want enough water that allows you to lift the foam. Because one thing is, if you don't have enough water to dilute the foam, one thing you could have is that then you inject your foam, and then that foam foams up and then comes to surface, which should then cause you a lot of issues on surface. So then your foam is not lifting liquid, it's just bringing the foam back in a foam bath. I know we had an instance one time in an asset where someone injected too much foam and the water didn't have a lot of liquids. And by the time they brought up the surface, all the pipelines, all the vessels were filled with foam, and they make the joke to say that they had a foam party. So one of the things to consider is, you know, for foam applications, what is your water gas ratio? What is your condensate gas ratio? Those are two things. There are a lot of things, but just on a high level, two things to consider, because either of them could influence the performance of your foam.
Thank you so much. It will have been the last question, but SD just asked a question now, and we want you to briefly answer it and move on. Can you also consider a reperforation of another gas pocket to complement what is being depleted?
Yes. Indeed. So that is what I talk about when I talk about stimulation. So stimulation, you know, so basically anything you can do to improve your inflow, because the more inflow you have, the more gas rate that you have that will push you outside of that critical gas rate that you have. So indeed, and usually actually what we usually say to when assets come to us and say, oh, we have liquid loading issues, we say, can you maximize your inflow? Because inflow is always the first thing that we try to do. So you maximize your inflow first. So either be a reperforation, or you do an acid clean out, or whatever you can do to ensure that your inflow is as optimal as possible, then before you go to trying to improve your outflow. So yes, if you can do a reperforation, fantastic, go for it. But usually what we see is that by the time, you know, we're talking about deliquification, we've exhausted all our means kind of thing. So that is why it gets tricky. But if you have an option to do a reperforation, please go for it as your first option before you start doing other things as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all for making this session a success, and we are happy that the presenter has given us a good value for our time. Thank you. To conclude this part, we'll welcome our section director, Haji Othman Mohamed, to present a certificate to you, the presenter and the moderator. SD, please.
We can't hear you. Are you speaking?
Actually, I couldn't unmute initially, so they didn't give me authorization, but it's okay now. So good evening all. I like to appreciate the presenter and hand over this appreciation certificate, Engineer Todun Akinremi, on behalf of young professionals of Section 103 and the board. We really appreciate this, your timely very interesting presentation. I also must commend the YP because this very interesting presentation, and it's timely because most of the industry players are looking at how to optimize their gas production. So indeed, this is a very timely presentation. Thank you very much, the YPs and Mr. Todun Akinremi. Thank you. Also, on behalf of the young professionals and the board of Section 103, we'd like to appreciate you Mr. Obonna Barime, Bari Ramu. Don't mind my presentation, and we really appreciate for you to moderate this session and also being with us from beginning to the end. And lastly, also the audience for being here from beginning to the end. Thank you very much, and keep it up. So I'm done.
Thank you so much, SD. It's time for us to take our photographs. So we encourage all to let's have their face. Please, you can start your video now.
Please answer.
Please, we need more people to turn on their videos. We want to see your beautiful faces. If you had a wonderful time this evening listening to our speaker, our ASME, kindly turn on your camera and give her a big smile just to appreciate her. Thank you. Simeon, please help us take pictures, please.
Okay, I think some videos are still coming up.
Okay.
Okay, let's give 5 seconds more. 3 seconds. 2. And let's have the last shot. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you all.
you. Thank you very much.
Helping us to see the beautiful faces. We appreciate you all. So now it's time for membership drive. Time for membership drive. Is Malala here?
Manuela, can you hear us?
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm not the one taking the membership drive. It's supposed to be Daniel Ikiki who's on the call.
Daniel, please go ahead. Ella, please go ahead. Since we can't hear
All right.
Daniel.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. First of all, I want to say special thanks to our presenter today. It was a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. And I want to say thank you to everyone for being here up until now. So basically, my assignment here is simple. I just want to encourage those of us that are not members of SPE. There are more than 1,000 reasons for you to become a member of SPE. And also for those of us that are already members of SPE, but we are yet to renew our membership, I think this is the best time for you to renew your membership, still early in the year, so you don't miss out on any of the benefits of being an SPE member. Speaking of benefits, okay, what are the benefits of being an SPE member? So you have strong industry network of leaders, peers, and mentors. So you can see on the call, we had different people with we had like Dr. Ndubisi asking questions. He is a lecturer and is also an active member of SPE. We have our technical leads, we have our YP chairs, and different people with different academic backgrounds and work experience that you can really learn from and take advantage of. Then also there is the live technical events such as this one. Very soon we'll be having our YP symposium coming up, and that's in the symposium are also going to be sharing useful and timely technical information. So that is another benefit of being an SP member. Then we have enhanced industry knowledge. So before now, I didn't know what I heard here before, and now I'm going back and I have like new knowledge that I can apply to my job. So that is another benefit of being an SP member. And there are so many more benefits. Yeah. So in case you're a student, we have a student's type of membership for you. So we have student membership, then we have the recent graduates for people that are just fresh out of school. So if you are an SP member just maybe last year or last year, this year will be free for you if you renew your membership as a recent graduate. Then we also have the young professionals like myself. So those are people that are below the age of 35 and have less than 14 years experience in the industry. So if you fall into that cadre, then you are a young professional. Then finally, we have our senior members. There we have our section chair, section chairman, we have section directors and other members of the board that obviously are above the age of 35 and have extensive experience in the industry. So if you need more information on how you can go about your membership, you can reach out to me. I'm going to drop my WhatsApp number and just chat me up and I will respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emanuela, for that membership drive section. It's time for us to listen to or to take the closing remark or say invite the YP technical team lead.
Yeah, just before our YP technical team lead comes up, we can see on the slides that we have some events coming up soon. So there's a graphics design masterclass for young professionals. Student members can also join that class. It's free and do well to attend if you're interested in graphics design. We also have the YP Symposium coming up. It's going to be a superb event. So watch this space. We'll be putting out the information about it when we kick off registration. It's going to happen in April 14th and 15th precisely. And then there's an ongoing call for donations for the YP charity project for this board year. We want to rehabilitate some schools in Port Harcourt. We want to help with some of the dilapidated structure in the school and even equip their library with some of the things that they need in those schools. So feel free to make donations to us and we look forward to having your donations. The account details are displayed on the flyer. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'll hand over now to our technical team lead, Mr. Basil.
Thank you. It's really been a very exciting session. I would like to really ascribe a lot of thanks to, first of all, our wonderful presenter today, who did a very fantastic job in educating and equipping us with a lot of information with regards to the subject of conversation today. I'm really grateful for that. And of course, many thanks to the guys behind the scene working and making sure that this event is a success. And of course, to all the folks that have joined the call today, really appreciate your commitment to SPE, your volunteering, of course, your desire to learn and better yourselves. I strongly believe that we've picked up one or two, or possibly even more from the session today. Like already mentioned, of course, if you have more questions or clarifications on what has been discussed, feel free to reach out to any of the members of the technical team, or of course our YP Mama, for any support you may need. So really grateful, and I would say let's keep learning and let's keep building, right? We'll connect again in the next session. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to you now, the moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Basil. We've enjoyed ourselves today. It was normal, every event that has a beginning, we have an end. So at this point, we are coming to the last part of our event today, and that is the closing prayer. We will be taking the national anthem as the closing prayer.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks to our speaker for a wonderful and a fantastic job. Well done. See you all next month. Stay in touch. Register for the upcoming activities. And just ensure you're following us on our different social media platforms where we'll be sharing fantastic and all the information that you need.